500 murders in a single year from one Sicilian clan. A Russian syndicate so wealthy that Guinness World Records named it the largest criminal organization on the planet. An Italian group from Calabria that controls 80% of Europe's cocaine. And an American crime family so secretive that the FBI has spent decades trying and failing to penetrate its inner circle. The families on this list have operated across continents, corrupted governments, and generated billions in revenue, from activities that range from drug trafficking to construction fraud to murder for hire. So let's walk through the crime families that have earned their place as the most dangerous on Earth, starting with the one that gave us the word mafia itself. A judge and a prosecutor, both on the same island, both assassinated within weeks of each other. In 1992, the Sicilian Mafia detonated a bomb underneath a highway to kill magistrate Giovanni Falcone, his wife, and 3 police officers. Less than 2 months later, prosecutor Paolo Borsellino was killed in a similar bombing. The target in both cases was the same: anyone who dared challenge the machine known as Cosa Nostra. The Sicilian Mafia, also referred to simply as the Mafia, is an Italian criminal society originating on the island of Sicily. The origin of the word mafia is debated, but it is likely derived from a combined Sicilian-Arabic expression. And that origin is telling, because protection, not just violence, has always been the foundation of this machine. The earliest incarnation of the organization was not a gang of street thugs. Early in the 19th century, Cosa Nostra was created in a surprisingly simple grab for power. This was a time of the gabellotto, entrepreneurs who leased farmlands from aristocrats, who would hire guards to both protect the property and control the working farmers, and these aristocrats would constantly be in debt to the gabellotto for rent and taxes, leading to the loss of their properties entirely. Those guards didn't just protect land, they seized it. They turned themselves into the ruling authority in places where the Italian state had little presence. The gabellotto and his guards would take bigger pieces of the pie by providing security to areas of the island that the state did not govern, and it wouldn't take long before they had power over the landlords and the farmers equally. This was the first noteworthy presence of a mafia in Sicily. What happened next shaped the entire criminal world. Most scholars agree that the mafia arose in the 19th century during Italy's unification. The mafia owes its origins to the many small private armies that were hired by absentee landlords to protect their estates from bandits. In the lawless conditions that prevailed, and these energetic ruffians grew so powerful that they turned against the landowners and became the sole law on many of the estates, extorting money in return for protecting crops. These weren't scattered criminals. They were organized operators who built parallel governments. The mafia is an alternative state, one capable of executing functions of government. The mafia's core business has always been to sell protection, and it finances itself by extracting taxes. By the mid-20th century, the Sicilian mafia had evolved from an agrarian protection racket into an international criminal juggernaut. The economic boom of the 1950s saw the Sicilian mafia move from an agrarian model toward an urban model, infiltrating public spending and construction work in major Sicilian cities, along with investing in a variety of businesses and becoming a world leader in the international drug market. They were no longer just shaking down olive farmers. They were pouring concrete in Palermo, bribing politicians in Rome, and shipping heroin across the Atlantic. The internal wars of the 1970s and 1980s are what turned Cosa Nostra from a feared regional entity into a household name worldwide. In the 1970s, the Corleonesi faction, led by a diminutive, stone-faced boss named Toto Riina, launched a campaign to become the supreme power within the mafia. In the 1970s, the Corleonesi family, led by boss Toto Riina, aimed to reach the acme of Cosa Nostra, and with their rise, 2 factions formed. One, the Corleonesi with Michele Greco, deemed the boss of bosses, at their side, and the other consisting of Don Tonno Badalamenti and Tommaso Buscetta. A bloodbath ensued, starting with Riina ordering the killing of Calderone. Riina's strategy was breathtaking in its simplicity. Kill everyone, opposing bosses, their relatives, their associates, even their distant family members. It was a scorched earth approach that left hundreds of bodies across Sicily's countryside and cities. The bloodshed drew a response from the Italian state that would change the mafia forever. In the early 1980s, magistrates Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino began a campaign against Cosa Nostra, And their big break came with the arrest of Tommaso Buscetta, a mafioso who chose to turn informant. Falcone and Borsellino organized the Maxi trial, lasting from February 1986 to December 1987, held in a bunker courthouse specially built for the occasion, where 475 mafiosi were put on trial, of which 338 were convicted. And in January 1992, Italy's Supreme Court confirmed these convictions. It is considered the most significant trial ever against the Sicilian Mafia, as well as the biggest trial in world history. Cosa Nostra responded the way it always has, with violence. The Mafia retaliated violently. In 1988, they murdered a Palermo judge and his son. And 3 years later, a prosecutor and an anti-mafia businessman were also murdered. Then came the assassinations of Falcone and Borsellino in 1992, which horrified the Italian public and triggered a massive government crackdown that continues to this day. In the past decades, Cosa Nostra has discarded its violent side in favor of business, pursuing what Italy's Anti-Mafia Commission of Inquiry calls a strategy of submersion. The Sicilian Mafia is now quieter than it used to be, but it still operates roughly 100 families in Sicily alone, particularly centered in Palermo, and its offspring in the United States would become even more infamous. On the evening of December 16, 1985, a black Lincoln Town car pulled up outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino crime family, stepped out. He never made it through the front door. Gotti and his allies had Castellano gunned down outside a steakhouse in Manhattan, and Gotti reportedly watched the hit from a nearby car. The man watching from that car was John Gotti, and with those gunshots, he became one of the most publicly recognized crime bosses in history. The Gambino crime family is an Italian-American mafia crime family, and one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime activities in New York City. The group is named after Carlo Gambino, boss of the family at the time of the McClellan hearings in 1963, when the structure of organized crime first gained public attention. The family went through a series of leaders and internal power struggles before a man named Albert Anastasia seized the reins. By 1951, Albert Anastasia had taken control, and he was best known for overseeing an organization called Murder Incorporated, which performed hundreds of mob-related assassinations. Anastasia was not only thought to be extremely dangerous, but many of his own people considered him to be insane. Murder Incorporated was exactly what it sounds like: a contract killing service that carried out hits on behalf of organized crime families across the country. Under Anastasia, the Gambino family's reputation for extreme violence was cemented into the fabric of the American underworld. But it was the man who came next who would transform the family into something far more calculated. Carlo Gambino was one of the most successful crime bosses of all time. He strengthened the family, increased their profit level immensely, and remained out of the public eye as much as possible, managing to avoid being linked to any criminal activities and running the family until 1976 without spending a single day in jail. That last detail is critical. Carlo Gambino understood something that many future mob bosses would fatally forget. Attention is the enemy, with tentacles reaching into labor unions, construction firms, and Wall Street. When Carlo died in 1976, he left the family to his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, bypassing the obvious choice, underboss Aniello Della Croce. Before his death, Gambino designated his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, as his successor, bypassing his long-serving underboss Aniello Della Croce, a decision that caused tensions within the organization. Castellano was much more of a white-collar, corporate-style boss, while Della Croce was in charge of the organization's street crews, which included the crew led by John Gotti, a Della Croce loyalist. The divide between the boardroom boss and the street soldiers was a fuse waiting to be lit. Castellano and Gotti reportedly disagreed on some of the organization's operational methods, and the divide boiled over after Della Croce's death on December 2, 1985. Days later, Gotti and several other captains concluded that Castellano lacked legitimacy and decided to assassinate him. After taking the throne, Gotti did everything that Carlo Gambino would have despised. Having eliminated the competition, Gotti took over as head of the Gambino family. With his expensive suits, lavish parties, and illegal dealings, he quickly became something of a media celebrity, and the press dubbed him the Dapper Don. He posed for newspaper photographers, He threw block parties in his Queens neighborhood. He wore $1,000 suits to court hearings. And when prosecutors charged him, he beat them 3 times. For years, Gotti managed to avoid criminal charges and successfully evaded a guilty verdict in 3 separate trials, which led to his nickname, the Teflon Don, because no prosecutor could make any charges stick. The FBI grew increasingly frustrated. They deployed surveillance technology, informants, and wiretaps, anything to pierce the wall around Gotti. The breakthrough came from the last person anyone expected. Gotti's underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, aided the FBI in convicting Gotti. In 1991, Gravano agreed to turn state's evidence and testify against Gotti, after hearing the boss make disparaging remarks about him on a wiretap that implicated them both in several murders. The underboss of the Gambino family, the number 2, flipped on his own boss because of wounded pride and a wiretap. In 1992, Gotti was convicted of 5 murders, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, illegal gambling, extortion, and loan sharking. He received life in prison without parole and died of throat cancer on June 10, 2002. His son tried to continue the legacy, but the family's golden era was over. According to Anthony Gaspipe Casso, the former underboss of the Lucchese crime family, what John Gotti did was the beginning of the end of Cosa Nostra. Gotti's love for the spotlight accomplished what decades of law enforcement could not. It made the Mafia visible, and visible mafias don't last. While John Gotti was busy being photographed for tabloid covers, another family was executing an entirely different strategy, one that law enforcement would later describe as the most effective organized crime operation in America. The Federal Bureau of Investigation considers the Genovese family the most powerful of the 5 families. The organization is the most formidable, sophisticated, secretive, and wealthiest mafia family in the United States. The Genovese crime family is an Italian-American mafia crime family and one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime activities in New York City and New Jersey as part of the American Mafia. The Genovese family is the oldest and largest of New York's 5 families and was the first to expand into New Jersey. The modern family was founded by Charles Lucky Luciano and was known as the Luciano crime family from 1931 to 1957. When Vito Genovese became boss, Luciano didn't just run a crime family. He designed the entire governance system for the American Mafia, and that role was abolished for the Commission, a ruling committee established by Lucky Luciano to oversee all mafia activities in the United States and to mediate conflicts between families. The Commission was a masterstroke of criminal governance, a board of directors for organized crime designed to prevent the kind of all-out wars that attracted police attention. What separates the Genovese family from every other American crime family is one word: silence. The family is unique in today's mafia and has benefited greatly from members following omerta, a code of conduct emphasizing secrecy and non-cooperation with law enforcement. While many mobsters from across the country have testified against their crime families since the 1980s, the Genovese family has had only 11 members and associates turn state's evidence in its history. 11. In an era where informants have decimated virtually every other crime family, the Genovese family has maintained an almost impenetrable wall of silence. The family's leadership structure was designed specifically to confuse law enforcement. The family appointed a series of front bosses to masquerade as the official family boss, and the aim of these deceptions was to protect the true leader by confusing law enforcement as to who the real leader of the family was. For decades, the FBI couldn't even determine who was actually running the organization. They would surveil and arrest one man, only to discover he was a decoy, while the real boss operated from the shadows. One of the most extraordinary examples of this strategy was boss Vincent Chin Gigante. Gigante attended his arraignment in pajamas and a bathrobe, and due to his defense stating that he was mentally and physically impaired, legal battles ensued for 7 years over his competence to stand trial. For years, Gigante shuffled around Greenwich Village in a bathrobe, muttering to himself, appearing to be a mentally ill man who could barely function. It was an act, a performance so convincing that it kept him out of prison for nearly a decade. At sanity hearings in March 1996, Sammy the Bull Gravano and Alphonse Little Al Diarco testified that Gigante was lucid at top-level mafia meetings, and that he had told other gangsters that his eccentric behavior was a pretense. While other families crumbled under the weight of RICO prosecutions and informant testimony, the Genovese family adapted. The Genovese family has maintained an ability to operate white-collar crime rackets, such as construction and labor racketeering, as other crime families were weakened and reduced to street-level, blue-collar crime rackets. They moved into sophisticated financial crimes, mortgage fraud, online gambling, home equity loan schemes, while other families were reduced to shaking down corner stores. The family continued to maintain influence in New York, New Jersey, Atlantic City, and Florida, and is recognized as the most powerful mafia family in the U.S., a distinction brought about by their continued devotion to secrecy. The family's influence also extends to smaller mafia families outside New York, including ties to organizations in Philadelphia, Cleveland, and beyond. The Genovese family is proof that in the criminal world, the loudest voices get silenced first. It's the quiet ones you should fear. If the Sicilian Mafia is the name everyone knows, the 'Ndrangheta is the name everyone should know, that would eventually surpass its Sicilian rivals to become the most powerful mafia in Italy and one of the most dangerous on earth. The 'Ndrangheta is a criminal organization that originated in Italy's Calabria region, one of the most extensive and powerful criminal enterprises in the world. The syndicate has engaged in illegal activities as diverse as embezzlement, fraud, extortion, waste dumping, and the trafficking of drugs, weapons, and humans. It is believed that the 'Ndrangheta's operations may earn as much as $60 billion annually. $60 billion. That figure would place the 'Ndrangheta's annual revenue higher than the GDP of many small countries. For most of its history, the 'Ndrangheta was dismissed as a rustic backward cousin of the Sicilian Mafia. Until the 1960s, the 'Ndrangheta primarily confined its operations within Italy to Calabria, focusing mainly on extortion and blackmail. Their involvement in cigarette smuggling expanded their reach and facilitated contacts with the Sicilian Mafia and the Neapolitan Camorra. But then two things changed everything: kidnapping and cocaine. With the great migration of close to 1 million Calabrians in post-war years, pockets of the 'Ndrangheta began to emerge throughout all of Italy and other parts of Europe, expanding their lawless activities from robbery and extortion to cigarette smuggling and kidnapping. It is estimated that between the 1970s and the 1990s, the organization executed over 200 abductions in Italy. The most famous of these was the 1974 kidnapping of J. Paul Getty III. That ransom money, hundreds of millions in total, became the seed capital for something far larger. The ransom payments provided the money needed for the organization's ascendance in the international drug trade. The 'Ndrangheta's rise in the cocaine market began in the 1980s with the increase in demand for the drug and the freedom from their rivals, Sicily's Cosa Nostra, who had their hands full in a war with the Italian state. While the Sicilians were battling judges and prosecutors, the 'Ndrangheta quietly built a cocaine pipeline from South America to Europe that would become the largest on the continent. The numbers are staggering. Italian investigators have estimated that approximately 80% of Europe's cocaine transits through the Calabrian port of Gioia Tauro and is controlled by the 'Ndrangheta. The 'Ndrangheta of Calabria currently reigns not only as Europe's major trafficker in cocaine, but as Italy's most influential mob, ahead of the Sicilian Mafia, the Camorra of Naples, and Sacra Corona Unita of Bari. The organizational structure is what makes them virtually impossible to destroy. The entire organization is built on blood ties. The overlap of blood and mafia family has not only worked as a shield to protect secrets and enhance security, but also helped to maintain identity in the territory of origin and reproduce it in territories where the family has migrated. This blood-based structure makes the code of silence nearly absolute. While there were around 1,000 turncoats associated with the Cosa Nostra and more than 2,000 who had left the Camorra, 42 informants in the entire history of the organization. That's an astonishing level of internal discipline. The 'Ndrangheta's geographic reach is equally terrifying. The 'Ndrangheta are reported to be operating in northern and central Italy, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, the rest of Europe, the Americas, Australia, West Africa, and Asia. By 2020, the organization was operating in more than 40 countries. A leaked 2008 U.S. diplomatic cable from Naples described Calabria in terms normally reserved for war zones. The cable detailed the sheer extent to which the 'Ndrangheta have infiltrated public and political life in their native region, stating, if it were not a part of Italy, Calabria would be a failed state, and described it as a place throttled by the iron grip of Western Europe's largest and most powerful organized crime syndicate. Italian authorities have mounted massive operations against them. In December 2019, over 300 individuals were arrested in Calabria on suspicion of 'Ndrangheta membership, in an operation involving 2,500 police officers. Among those arrested was Giancarlo Pitelli, a prominent lawyer, and former member of Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia party. Chief Prosecutor Nicola Gratteri described these arrests as the second largest in Italian organized crime history. Cut off one Ndrina and another takes its place, because the bloodlines and the cocaine pipeline remain intact. In the wreckage of the Soviet Union, a different kind of criminal empire rose to power, one that didn't need centuries of tradition or Sicilian codes of honor. The largest criminal organization in terms of revenue is the Solntsevskaya Bratva, also known as the Russian Mafia, an organized crime syndicate with its origins in the Solntsevo district of Moscow in the late 1980s. That's not an opinion. That's a Guinness World Record. The Solntsevskaya gang was founded in the late 1980s by Sergei Mikhailov, a former waiter, who had served a prison term for fraud, and Viktor Averin. Based in the Solntsevo district of Moscow, the gang recruited local unemployed, aggressive young men as foot soldiers, and also made use of thief-in-law Jamal Khachidze to enhance their reputation. The Solntsevo district was strategically located near the M3 highway leading to Ukraine, the MKAD Ring Road, and the Vnukovo International Airport. A former waiter, that's who built what would become the largest criminal syndicate on the planet. Mikhailov understood something critical. The Soviet Union's collapse wasn't a tragedy, it was an opportunity, and he seized it with both hands. The Russian Mafia has its roots in Stalin's forced labor camps during the Soviet era, where political dissidents and criminals organized under leaders known as thieves-in-law. By the 1980s, they had expanded into other countries, including the US. The Gulag system created a vast brotherhood of hardened criminals who shared codes, tattoos, and loyalty structures that would survive the camps and eventually dominate the streets. Many of these syndicates were based not on family affiliation, as with the Italian Mafia, but on networks first established in Stalin's gulags, where gang members were identified by an elaborate system of tattoos, designating syndicate affiliation, criminal specialty, and even sexual proclivity. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the Bratva didn't just survive the transition to capitalism, they became its architects. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the gang utilized the chaos to empower themselves by establishing relationships with politicians. They were now able to influence the Russian state for their own benefit. They also bought several legitimate businesses to launder their money, including banks, casinos, and even the Vnukovo airport. Think about that for a moment. A criminal organization purchased an international airport. Their structure, according to Federico Verrese, a professor of criminology at the University of Oxford, is highly decentralized. The group is composed of 10 separate quasi-autonomous brigades that operate more or less independently of each other. The group does pool its resources, however, and the money is overseen by a 12-person council. This decentralized model makes the Bratva virtually impossible to dismantle. Russian organized crime does not possess a clearly defined top-down hierarchy, unlike the Italian mafias with their capofamiglie, or the Chinese triads with their mountain masters. The Russian mafia structural ranking does not include irreplaceable leaders. It would be impossible to take down a few heads of the Red Mafia in order to topple the entire organization. The Bratva's involvement in the global drug trade is equally expansive. The Solntsevskaya Bratva became one of the richest criminal organizations in the world. The organization is also involved in the international cocaine trade, with its links to Colombian drug cartels brokered by the Contrera Caruana Mafia clan. The Bratva dealt in heroin from Afghanistan, cocaine from South America, and weapons from the former Soviet arsenal. The relationship between the Bratva and the Russian government is what truly distinguishes them from every other criminal organization on this list. According to the US, as published during the 2010 WikiLeaks scandal, the Solntsevo gang continues racketeering operations under the protection of the FSB, a Russian state security agency. That's not a claim from a tabloid. That's from leaked diplomatic cables published by WikiLeaks. The line between state power and criminal power in Russia is not blurred. In many cases, it simply doesn't exist. The violence that accompanied their rise was medieval in its brutality. An American hotel co-owner in Moscow, Paul Tatum, refused to sell his share of the Radisson Slavianskaya Hotel. Tatum allegedly ran afoul of Solntsevskaya when he refused to sell his share in the hotel to his partner. In November 1996, he was shot in the Moscow subway 11 times in the face and neck. His 2 bodyguards stood by and let the killer get away and sell parts of it on the black market to terrorists. The FBI warns if Russian organized crime could help foreign crime networks to gain access to nuclear material, then the scenario becomes truly frightening. The man often described as the puppet master behind much of the Russian underworld is Semyon Mogilevich. Semyon Mogilevich is described by agencies in the European Union and United States as the boss of all bosses of most Russian mafia syndicates in the world. Mogilevich has been one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives, linked to arms trafficking, money laundering, and fraud on a scale that dwarfs most national budgets. So after examining these families, from the sun-baked olive groves of Sicily to the frozen suburbs of Moscow, the question remains, which one is the most dangerous on Earth? The answer depends on how you define dangerous. If you define it by sheer financial power, the Solntsevskaya Bratva holds a position that no other single criminal organization can match. Their revenue estimates, their reach into state institutions, and their access to military-grade weaponry place them in a category of their own. If you measure it by control of the global drug trade, the 'Ndrangheta stands alone. The Italian parliament estimates that the organization now dominates 80% of the European cocaine trade, with agents operating in every major port across the world. Their blood-tied structure makes them the most resistant to law enforcement infiltration of any organization on this list. But there are other families that deserve mention in this conversation. According to a Catholic university study, Mafia activity generates $33 billion in revenue, most of which is shared between the 4 largest mafia groups in Italy. The Camorra is the most successful, with an estimated $4.9 billion in annual income, from sexual exploitation, firearms trafficking, drugs, counterfeiting, gambling, and extortion. Based in Naples, the group has been active since the 19th century. The Camorra's vast, decentralized network of over 100 clans operating in and around Naples makes it the highest-earning single Italian mafia group, a statistic that often surprises people who focus only on the Sicilian Cosa Nostra. Across the Pacific, the Yakuza have their own claim to notoriety. The Yakuza belong to various Japanese crime syndicates, and while these clans are not as powerful as they once were, the crime syndicate continues to operate, with over 12,000 alleged members and 3 principal clans. The largest, wealthiest, and most powerful is Yamaguchi-gumi, which consists of over 8,000 Yakuza and operates out of the city of Kobe. The Yamaguchi-gumi has operated for over a century, making it one of the longest-running criminal organizations on the planet. If you measure danger by institutional corruption, the ability to become the state itself, the Sicilian Cosa Nostra and the Solntsevskaya Bratva share the crown. Both have corrupted politicians, judges, and law enforcement at the highest levels of their respective countries. Both have murdered government officials who stood in their way. And if you measure it by secrecy, by the ability to operate in plain sight while remaining invisible, then the Genovese family is perhaps the most terrifying of them all. In an age of mass surveillance, wiretaps, and informant programs, they have maintained operational security that puts intelligence agencies to shame. The truth is, there is no single most dangerous family. These organizations occupy different ecosystems, serve different markets, and employ different methods, but they share one thing in common. They have all, at various points, been more powerful than the governments that were supposed to stop them, and that more than any body count or revenue figure is what makes them dangerous. These are not relics of the past. They are operating right now, in cities you've visited, in industries you interact with daily, through financial systems your money passes through. The most dangerous mafia families on Earth didn't disappear. They adapted. And that's precisely what makes them so hard to stop.